Hey sophomores, Athene here. Here we go. We are going to talk today about Chapter 1 of Outliers. Just a reminder, what it is that you looked at and what it is that you will be looking at. In your previous reading, you looked at the way that the citizens of Roseto were outliers in terms of their health. It helped us understand what the concept of an outlier was and also helped us understand why our study of outliers would help us reflect on the things that we can control that relate to our success and those things that we can't. So just flashing those essential questions for our book up here, and remember the black questions are essential. The purple sub-questions are ways that you can apply those essential questions to each case study within the text, because Gladwell here is writing a persuasive essay and he's presenting evidence. So I always want you to be thinking about the kind of evidence he uses and the ways that he structures his argument as you read. Okay, before we read Chapter 1, I want you to think about a couple of things. I'll be honest with you, the topics within this chapter deeply personally, I think, affected me. I'll kind of reflect a bit as we go, because again, part of the purpose of this book is personal reflection. Obviously not for me, for you, but I just want to share an example of what that looks like. So we're going to talk about the Matthew effect, Chapter 1. So before we actually get started, before we even read this text, or before we talk about the title and why it's Matthew, I want you to consider a couple of questions. I want you to consider whether you're relatively young or relatively old for your grade level. And then I want you to consider how your relative age within that system, within the September to June system that has kind of structured your friend groups and your academic peers that you're measured against and that you're competitive with. I want you to consider how your relative age within that group has affected you. Has your relative age affected your academic performance? Maybe it has more in one area than another. Maybe you're considering different subject areas. Maybe your relative age has made it interesting for you in relating to grade level peers. Sometimes kids that are, older or younger might not necessarily seem eye to eye with other peers. Has it affected your athletic performance? Your physical size relative to your peers, your placement on teams, or has there been any other impact of your own relative age? Now, I always share a little bit as I'm talking about the text. So for me, I was actually incredibly young for my grade level. If we put it in like terms of a sophomore, I turned from 14 to 15 my sophomore year. So I didn't turn from 15 to 16 until November 24th of my junior year. I was really young for my grade, like really young. That was mostly because I, was born in 1977 and I was able to read by the time that I was 4. And basically in the early 1980s in Missouri, they thought, well, my goodness, she should be in advanced placement classes, etc., in terms of like starting school. So I began kindergarten when I was 4, and then it just kind of continued on that way. Now, as a result of that, I was younger than everybody else. I was younger than some of my friends by like 14 or 15 months. And sometimes my sophomores don't believe that a 14 or 15-month age difference can make a big difference, but it really can. In people, you think about the difference between yourself as a beginning of year freshman and now. You probably have learned a lot. You probably have a lot more to bring to the table. So with that, my friends, relative age, on the opposite side can confer some advantages. If you're much older, you might understand some complex concepts more quickly. You might have an opportunity to go ahead and, be taller than your peers, if that confers an advantage for you in a sports type of situation. So in essence, right, this idea of relative age is something that can be personally impactful and have emotional impact. I was always, like I said, able to read, but I was not that good at math. I probably would have had more confidence in my math education if I had been with same age peers as opposed to peers that were like relatively a year and a half older than me. Consider at this time how relative age has impacted your academic performance. Okay, I want to make sure that we begin with a literary mode here. Gladwell does choose to give chapters to his narrative. He does choose to give titles to those chapters. We didn't see titles or chapters with night, and we didn't see titles in Kincaid. But here we are, and he's chosen to give us an illusion in this chapter. Now, I want to be clear, this is not a Christian book, and it's not a Christian narrative. What Gladwell is doing here is he is referring to the fact, with a biblical allusion in the title of chapter 1, with this biblical allusion, he's referring to the fact that a lot of the structures that create rules around Western society may have, on some level, an allusion to the Bible. So the part of the Bible that he's alluding to when he refers to the Matthew effect as this title for the chapter about relative age and exponentially compounding experiences and how they add value, the quote is right here. For unto everyone that hath shall be given, and he shall have abundance. But from him that hath not shall be taken away even that which he hath. Biblical style, my friends. It's not always immediately clear. If we were in class, I would be like, okay, ladies and gentlemen, discuss in your table groups. What in the world does that mean? And then you would turn to each other and you would decode together. However, essential learning, in the absence of a table group, the implication of this, I will decode it for you, is that it is those people who are successful who are most likely to be given the kinds of special opportunities that lead to further success, which we call the advantage of exponentially compounding experiences. Gladwell realizes that in addition to your relative age, if you're able to access higher quality instruction early, that higher quality instruction will ultimately confer additional value, exponentially compounding value, greater value over the years that you have access to it. So we're going to be looking at those two elements of success today. We're going to be looking at relative age and the advantage of exponentially compounding experiences. So at this time, I'd like you to pause our video and I'd like you to read or listen to chapter 1 of the Matthew effect. And when you come back, you are going to be processing that. I will begin with some summary and then we will continue on. Okay, sophomores, having read a couple of big ideas that I hope that you caught, these are the things that I would have asked you to discuss in your table groups to summarize your reading after homework. So the idea of relative age, Gladwell chooses to use hockey in order to share with us the idea of relative age. He shares the idea that a few months of age difference can play a fundamental role in the way you're categorized into teams in Canadian hockey. And then that relative age is also confers advantages that are exponentially compounded over the course of the years that you play hockey. So over time, professional Canadian hockey players tend to be born earlier in the year, showing us that there is an advantage to the relative age of someone born in like the January, February months. Amongst other examples, Wayne Gretzky here is the best, I guess. So they say. Okay, so what we want to appreciate, right, is that these patterns within hockey, right, necessarily confer an advantage to people born earlier in the year. So as sociologists, as armchair sociologists, consider, is there something that should be done to this system to make it more fair for those people who were born, like, say, myself, at the very end of the year, November 24th? Should the system be changed to be more fair? Is that the role of the system? Is it therefore fair to blame ourselves 100% for every failure? Now, I personally, Matheny, can go ahead and blame myself for not becoming a hockey player. I've put no effort whatsoever into it. But had I worked hard for years to try and become a hockey player, would the fact that I was born at the very end of the year, would that have conferred a negative advantage at the elite level? I don't know. I don't play hockey. But I will say I do enjoy the fast-paced nature of that sport relative to, say, baseball. A couple other ways that we can talk about the idea of the combined advantage of relative age and exponentially compounding experiences are, for example, looking at the NFL draft. Those people who are born earlier in the year have been drafted at a greater percentage than those people who have been born later in the year. Now, I want to be clear, it doesn't mean that there's nobody born in November or December that plays in the NFL. Obviously, that's ridiculous. But what we want to appreciate is that you are more likely to have the advantage of exponentially compounding experiences resulting in you being an outlier drafted to the NFL, if your birthday is in a particular time period. Another element, not sports related, though Gladwell likes to use that example, and I think that's cool. Reading comprehension. I just have to go to my own personal background, right? One of the reasons that you're probably in this class and that you're sitting here talking about the extent to which something is Gladwellian or not, like you are in a 40-year-old meeting in New York City, is that you probably have conferred some advantage from exponentially compounding experiences with good reading instruction. The more words you know, we've talked about this at the beginning of the year when we looked at why we teach vocabulary to you guys in 10th grade, but the more words you know, the larger your toolbox is to explain an increasingly nuanced worldview. That confers exponentially compounding advantages because then you know those words when you hear them. We all have had the experience of learning a word and then all of a sudden hearing it all the time. It's not all of a sudden appearing more. It just, you kind of tuned it out before, you didn't catch it. So those advantages, they exponentially compound, conferring a greater success for you. Good news for you. But what does that mean for people who are socioeconomically underprivileged or don't have the access to those types of instruction? How can we go ahead and use this information to ameliorate or to kind of level out the achievement gap between groups of people who are able to confer this advantage and groups of people that aren't? That's where politics comes into play. I want you to take a second right now and consider, if you haven't already, how has this idea of relative age affected you? And then consider this: is it really fair to blame ourselves 100% for every failure or credit ourselves 100% for every success, right? If we do, in fact, have these exponentially compounding advantages, to what extent are we personally responsible? Now, I want to be clear, Gladwell is not absolving you from personal responsibility for hard work. Hard work is an important part of the equation. I swear it's chapter 2. We're about to get there. But we want to appreciate, right, that there are some initial advantages that might confer a long-term privilege to some people. Fortunately, most of the time, the people in my class are the beneficiaries of those types of privilege. Okay, so for example, chapter 1, guys, we looked at relative age and the advantage of exponentially compounding experiences. Totally let me know if you still have questions about that. What we would have discussed in our table groups now is the extent to which the benefits conferred by relative age and exponentially compounding experiences, are they due to talent, preparation, or opportunity? So pause for just a second to consider that idea. Like, relative age has nothing to do with talent, does it? And relative age has nothing to do with preparation. I had nothing to do with myself being born on November 24th, and I don't even want to think about that. I bet you don't either. But like compounding experiences, exponentially compounding experiences, that definitely could have something to do with talent. If I've shown an initial talent for something, a teacher is more likely to take interest, provide me with opportunities, and then ultimately I kind of get on that experience train that is headed towards success station. I'm sorry, that metaphor got away from me and became very corny. The idea of preparation, right? You definitely need to consider how preparation and exponentially compounding experiences would relate well. But relative age might relate to opportunity, the opportunity of being older in your class, right? That's something that you can't plan for. So consider the way that there are correlations between those two sets of ideas, so that you can consider the extent to which you are in control of these two factors for success. Personally, I don't feel that I'm necessarily in charge of my relative age, though now that I'm aware of that, I try to manipulate it if I can. I try to be a little bit older in groups so that I can use my exponentially compounded experiences. But I also go ahead and realize, right, that it's time for me to listen when I see people that have those advantages within a group. It helps me kind of filter when I'm a leader and when I'm not. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you will, go on ahead, consider these ideas for yourself. Come back here tomorrow, and we will be moving forward. Thanks a lot, guys.